Hello, everybody. Um, I I think we could go ahead and get started. I'll first just say the mayor is out tonight, so I am filling in for her. Um, and and I think we're gonna move right into our work session and starting with the interim budget changes. Alicia, welcome.
Good afternoon, um, Madam President. Oh,
Do I need to do a roll call first? We'll do that first. Sorry, Alicia.
thank you.
Corliss,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Morales,
Here.
Nash, Stead,
Here.
Willetts, 4 present, 2 absent.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Alicia, please go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam President, council members. I have 4 interim budget changes this afternoon for your consideration. The first proposed change is for McDevitt Park, and it comes from the Parks and Rec Department for $200,000 in one-time spending authority for improvements at the park. This funding would come from regional park impact fees. The funds would be used to construct a multi-use pathway inside the park and install lighting along Eagle Road. During the permitting process, the department was notified that the city's pathway master plan calls for a connection along Eagle Road between the parking lot and the northeast corner of the park. That connection was not included in the original construction budget. So this increase will add the path and the lighting, and it'll improve safety, provide an off-street walking and biking connection, and bring the park into alignment with the city's pathway and master plan. The request was reviewed and approved, by the Impact Fee Committee in February. The second interim budget change is another Parks and Recreation request for $140,000. It is a budget neutral appropriation from the Heritage Fund, and this is to complete improvements at Julia Davis Rose Garden. The additional funding is needed to complete accessibility and safety improvements, including ADA accessible paths, accessible seating, irrigation upgrades, and soil replacement. And these updates will ensure the Rose Garden remains safe and accessible to all visitors. And the next 2 interim budget changes are related to housing and come from Housing and Community Development. The first is related to the redevelopment of the Lusk property on South Capitol Boulevard. The request is to authorize up to $10 million in one-time housing investment funds to support the development of affordable housing on city-owned land. The project will include approximately 355 affordable units, 10,000 square feet of commercial space, and a parking garage. The city's contribution will serve as gap financing, and it'll make the project financially feasible for the project partners. The funding is coming from the city's Affordable Housing Fund, and it'll be managed by Idaho Housing and the Idaho Housing and Finance Association. It'll be distributed in 2 phases. The first will be about $2.7 million this spring before construction begins. And then the second phase will be $7.3 million later in fiscal year 26 at closing. And then the final interim budget change is also from HCD, and it's requesting a budget neutral appropriation of $8.5 million. And this is tied to the development of 48 permanent supportive housing units at 860 West Sherwood Street. This project is funded through a federal housing trust fund grant administered by Idaho Housing and Finance Association. Under this agreement, the city will provide a loan to the developer to construct the project. As those funds are spent, the city will be fully reimbursed by the Housing Trust Fund dollars. So this doesn't require any additional city funding. We will be fully reimbursed. Madam President, that concludes the interim budget changes. I'm happy to stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alicia. Any questions?
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Alicia, good to see you. First, very excited to see a couple of these projects going through on Lusk and Sherwood. This has been like 6+ years in the making on some of these, so good to see those steps getting taken. I apologize if I missed this, but on the McDevitt Park one, because that comes from impact fee funds, before that comes to us, it has to go through an additional process, correct? It goes through, is it the impact fee committee? And what's the process?
Councilmember Halliburton, you are correct. It has to go through, it has to be approved by the impact fee committee, and they have to approve the increase.
Yeah, so anytime we're using impact fees for any of our
Anytime.
parks, it goes through them, then it comes to us for those approvals. Great.
Mhm.
I had forgotten that we actually had a section of pathways plan out there, which I usually remember anything to do with the pathways master plan, but I think sometimes because it's on the other side of Eagle Road, we forget that we've got pathways over there too. But then I looked up the pathways master plan, and sure enough, there it is. And really a pretty incredible way for neighbors on both sides to be able to connect to the park. So I'm excited to see that. And yeah, we don't always see lots of stuff coming from the impact fee on an interim budget change. And so it's good to see that it comes through that committee first.
Anybody else?
Madam Mayor, Alicia, could you just walk us through the Heritage Fund also at the for the Rose Garden at Julie Davis?
Councilmember Corliss, absolutely. The Heritage Fund consists of donations that are managed by Parks and Rec Department and used for minor capital and maintenance projects. I also have Director Arkell here, who can answer in more detail if you would like more information on the Heritage Fund.
No, I think that would be fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions, I would take a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the interim budget changes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes,
Corliss,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
thank you. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Yeah.
Oh, you're next too for the quarterly report.
Right. Good afternoon. Happy to present the first quarter financial report for fiscal year 26, which covers October through December. So with 25% of the fiscal year behind us, the city's finances are generally performing within expectations. General fund revenues and expenditures, again, kind of where we expect them to be. The notable exception, as you'll see in the coming slides, continues to be development fee revenues, which collections have been higher than budgeted. Oops, that. So looking at our revenues, just 7% of general fund revenues have been collected in the first quarter, which is consistent with prior years. Our largest general fund revenue sources, property taxes, sales tax, liquor tax distribution, aren't collected in the first quarter. Those will be seen in the second quarterly report. But we did receive 6.6 million or 34% of budgeted development fee revenue. This continues to be driven by large commercial projects such as the Micron expansion, large hospital project, as well as airport construction activity. And because of this activity, staff expects development fee revenue to exceed budget by at least $3 million this year. On the expenditure side, overall expenditures are within range after quarter one, with just over 25% of expenditures happening. We have personnel slightly under based on calendar days due to vacancies. Our vacancy rate averaged at 4.6%, which is lower in the first quarter than the first quarter of 2025, and it's down from the fourth quarter of fiscal year 20, the last quarter of 25 as well. The personnel savings were partially offset by one-time compensation that happens for performance payments in the first quarter of the fiscal year. Our maintenance and operation spending was slightly above the 25% benchmark, and this is normal and occurs each year due to software and cloud subscription payments, which are front-loaded. And we also have annual transfers and payments to other organizations that occur at the beginning of the fiscal year. But we expect this to normalize and throughout the rest of the remaining quarters of the fiscal year. Boise's unemployment rate has held steady at 3.1% over the quarter, which is the lowest in the region and lower than the U.S. unemployment rate. A couple other economic indicators as of December in 2025. The employment rate is up year over year from December 2024 at 1.5%. And airport traffic as well. It was up 1.6% over the prior quarter and then up 4.8% over the prior year, December 2024. So overall, as I said, general fund expenditures are tracking within the anticipated range, and general fund revenues, with the exception of department development fees.
Alicia, I have a quick question
yeah,
on the
absolutely.
employment statistics. Are those for residents of the city or for within the organization of the city? Does that make sense?
Council member Stead, I believe it is residents. I'll have to confirm with my data source, but I believe it's within the city limits.
Okay, that's what I'm getting some confirmation from council up here too. So we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. But just to reiterate, yes, overall general fund revenues and expenditures within expected limits, expected budget levels for first quarter of the fiscal year. Happy to take any questions that you may have.
Madam Mayor, Alicia, can you walk back through the first slide
Mhm.
and second slide. For the carry forward fund balance, can you walk us through that item?
Councilmember Corliss, the carry forward fund balance. So the FY26 adopted budget column is our planned budgeted carry forward. So what we had planned in the 26 budget to balance what we needed from 25 to carry forward into 26 to make our budget balance. And then the revised budget reflects what actually carried forward. And it reflects all of the rebudgeted items that were approved in the December end of year report. So that's why it is higher.
Madam Mayor, just a follow up. And Alicia, to confirm, though this is a carry forward fund balance, this is not excess funds in the city. Is this for funds that cover projects that have moved forward fiscal years?
Councilmember Corliss, that is correct. This represents funds that were previously appropriated by the council, and it is work that's continuing in this current fiscal year.
Great. Thank you, Alicia.
Alicia, when you were talking about our staff vacancy rate, I think it showed it at 4.6. Don't when we budget, isn't there a certain percentage that we're factoring into our budget to begin with? I'm trying to remember what the number is.
Councilmember Halliburton, that is correct. We do factor into our budget a vacancy rate. It is about 6%, if I am remembering correctly. I'll have to follow up. My memory is not serving me correctly. And yes, that is centrally held. And so we sweep vacancy savings from department budgets quarterly and carry that centrally.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, I think we updated that amount that we put in the budget because we were never quite hitting the target. At that point, I think the challenge was that we we're always thinking the number was going to be, smaller, or we budgeted for a really small number, like 3.5% or something like that. And we never actually hit that goal. And then I think we had to adjust it down. So I was just trying to remember what that number was, and maybe it's 6%, but I can follow up and check and see what, we're budgeting for at the beginning of the year. But that would make sense if it was 6, and then we got to 4.6, why it would have affected the budget that way. Which if it is 6, and we're continuing to stay at this mark, it might be something for us to be looking at when we're looking at our next year's budget of, does our standard number need to be a little bit lower going forward now that we're post-pandemic and kind of getting back to normal employment types of mechanisms at the city.
Madam Mayor. Oh, one more question. Alicia, looking at liquor tax, as I understand from last year and hearing that liquor revenues are down nationwide and in Idaho as well. Are we revising that? Did we revise that number down for this fiscal year?
Councilmember Corliss, correct. Yes, we did revise our liquor revenue budget in the fiscal year 26 budget by $700,000, I believe, and to reflect the reduced consumption and behavioral patterns that we've seen and reduction in revenue. And we'll be getting our first payment in the second quarter, so we'll see exactly what that looks like, and we'll report back in our second quarter.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Alicia. Appreciate the information and the presentation. Thank you. And next up, we have the Office of Police Accountability with their 2025 report. Director McKay.
Sorry, just a minute. I think it was accidentally exited out of.
Oh yeah, no problem. Take your time.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, Madam President and members of City Council. My name is Nicole McKay. I'm the Director of the Office of Police Accountability, and it is a pleasure to be with you today to present our 2025 annual report. Presenting along with me today is Lexi Whitmore, OPA's data analyst. Lexi is going to start us off by presenting data on contacts to OPA, BPD investigations, use of force, and some analysis on national benchmarking. I will then return to provide you updates on critical incidents, recognitions and recommendations, trainings, and then looking ahead in 2026. So Lexi.
Good afternoon, Madam President and Council members. I will be presenting the data portion of OPA's annual report. Feel free to jump in with questions at any point, and I will also stand for questions before Director McKay returns to the podium. First, let's take a look at contacts to OPA in 2025. The majority of the contacts were informational or complaints, with 2 appeal investigations and 2 commendations. OPA received a similar number of contacts in 2024 and 2025, specifically 125 last year compared to 132 in 2024. However, a higher proportion of those contacts were complaints, 47% in 2025 compared to 30% in 2024. As a reminder, a complaint is an allegation that, if proven true, would constitute a violation of BPD policy or the law. One potential reason for the higher proportion of complaints may be more public awareness of OPA and what our office does. Now let's look at the determinations made in our completed complaint investigations. As in 2024, the top 3 categories for complaints remained duty performance, constitutional rights violations, and demeanor or rudeness. In 2025, we had 4 complaints sustained. These were in the categories of duty performance and failure to record, and they were opportunities for coaching rather than serious misconduct. The sustained allegations made up 9% of OPA's overall complaints. This differs from 2024, where OPA had no sustained complaints. Now let's take a look at similar data for investigations by the Boise Police Department. Last year, BPD's Office of Internal Affairs had 98 complaints, inquiries, and department-initiated investigations. This is an increase of 68% from 2024. The chart to the left compares the numbers of cases in both years. While increases were seen across the board, the largest increase was in complaints, which more than doubled. Complaints also made up a larger proportion of investigations at 42% compared to 29% in 2024. I will note that calls for service increased by 9% in 2025, and that may account for a portion of the increase in investigations. Now let's look at the determinations made in BPD's investigations. Similar to OPA, the top 3 categories for allegations at BPD were performance of duty, demeanor, and constitutional rights violations. While the raw number of investigations increased in 2025, the percentage sustained remains stable year over year. BPD sustained allegations in 54% of their completed investigations last year, compared to 52% in 2024. This rate of sustained allegations was primarily driven by department-initiated investigations, which were sustained 92% of the time. Meanwhile, citizen complaints were sustained 28% of the time. OPA audits all of these investigations, and Director McKay will give more details on the findings from those audits later in the presentation. I also analyzed use of force in 2024 versus 2025. I compared incidents involving force per call for service and looked at both show of force, which is aiming a weapon, and use of force, which is discharging a weapon or physical force. We saw a decrease in show of force from 0.06% of calls to 0.05% of calls, and that is a decrease of 17%. Use of physical force remains stable at 0.05% of calls in both years. I'd like to talk in more detail about shifts in levels of force. Notably, there was a complete drop in deadly force with 0 critical incidents in 2025. We did see an increase in intermediate levels of force, particularly in less lethal weapons and punches and kicks. As critical incidents are statistically rare events, it's difficult to definitively say what caused that complete drop in deadly force. However, we can discuss potential contributing factors. One relevant trend is the significant increase in pepper ball use, which increased from 2 uses in 2024 to 18 uses in 2025. Pepper ball is included in the less lethal weapon category in the chart on the left. On-body video reviewed by OPA suggests that prudent application of this tool helps officers maintain a safer distance from armed suspects, potentially preventing the use of deadly force in high-stakes situations. Distance is one effective strategy outlined in BPD's de-escalation policy. Another trend I'd like to highlight is the decrease in aiming of a firearm from 116 instances to 95. Aiming of a firearm is included in the show of force category in the chart on the left. When a firearm is not already being aimed, officers may be more likely to default to other techniques and tools first. Those are some of the notable trends in force for 2025. We also have public data dashboards available on the Office of Police Accountability website that include force data, and you can find them at the URL below. These dashboards currently provide data from 2023 to 2024 and are a great resource for more in-depth information. They will also be updated with 2025 data later in the spring. Finally, I'd like to present my national benchmarking analysis on use of force. Although OPA regularly presents use of force data, it can be hard to conceptualize what it actually means that, for example, 0.05% of calls involved physical force last year. The goal of this analysis is to give context to those numbers by comparing BPD to departments in statistically similar cities. First, I identified 20 cities that are similar to Boise from a public safety perspective. The factors that I used for comparison were population, racial and ethnic demographics, median household income, violent crime, property crime, and poverty level. Of those 20 candidate cities I identified, 9 had usable use of force data available. And you can see those selected cities on the map to the left. In general, data availability was a major challenge in this analysis. Many cities simply do not make this data available, and even cities that do may provide only single-year data. A few of the cities I evaluated as benchmarking candidates even had ongoing lawsuits from journalists to access data on force. That makes it even more significant that OPA has a high level of access to BPD's data. And we're able to share that information with the public because that's not yet the norm nationwide. First, I analyzed use of force generally. I looked at the percentage of calls for service that involve physical force in each city. Many cities do not track show of force, so that has been excluded from the analysis. In this sample, BPD had the second lowest rate of physical force, and that was, again, as mentioned earlier, 0.05% of calls for service. One important thing to note is that this data covers a single year of force data for each city due to data availability. Now let's look at deadly force. To compare fatal officer-involved shootings over the last decade, I used a rate of incidents per 100,000 people. Since call data wasn't consistently tracked across all our benchmark cities from 2015 to 2025, population gives us the fairest comparison here. In this sample, BPD had the third highest rate of fatal shootings per 100,000 people. In a sense, we have two contrasting results here. BPD's overall use of force has been comparatively low in recent years, while fatal officer-involved shootings have been comparatively high. I think the most important question now is our trajectory. No worries. It has been almost 16 months since BPD's last use of deadly force, which is a clear indicator of positive progress. Over the coming years, it will be valuable to see not just how BPD's use of deadly force evolves, but whether there are broader changes nationally as well.
Hey, Lexi, before you move forward, sorry,
Yes.
Madam Mayor, the slide before, just to reiterate, was just 1 year, was last year?
For BPD, this was last year, correct? And it
Yes.
was the same rate in 2024 as well.
And then the next one over is over the course of 10 years.
Correct.
Okay, great.
I also want to briefly discuss a few limitations in this analysis, which revolve around national data availability. First, true apples to apples comparisons are tough because police departments define their metrics differently. To address this, I reviewed individual policy manuals and eliminated cities who had two different definitions for things like calls for service or low-level force. Second, for overall use of force, we're looking at, as I mentioned, single year force data, which means an outlier year could slightly skew a city's profile. Third, because there is no consistent national tracking for critical incidents where a suspect survives, our deadly force rates only count fatal shootings. And finally, to calculate those deadly force rates, I used commuter-adjusted population. Total calls for service would be a slightly more precise measure of police interactions with citizens, but since we can't get that data everywhere or for every year, the adjusted population is a reliable alternative. Ultimately, while we don't have perfect national data yet, these methods still give us a solid estimate of where BPD stands among its peers. having to navigate these gaps in information really highlights the value of clear public reporting. And it's my hope that we continue to see transparency grow on a national level. That concludes the data portion of OPA's report, and I'd be happy to stand for any remaining questions before Director McKay returns to the podium.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Lexi, first of all, I just want to say thanks to the entire OPA department. I'm so impressed every time you guys come forward. You're bringing data and more data. And the dashboards that you've created online for the public to access is so helpful, meeting our transparency. And like you, I hope we see this through other cities throughout the country. I have a couple just clarifying questions. If we can go back one slide. So as Councilmember Halliburton said, this is for 10 years. It would be nice to see this trend kind of year over year to see where we are trending as a city. I think we had 0 fatalities, right, this last year. Is that correct?
Madam President, Councilmember Corliss, that is correct. We had 0 fatalities or use of deadly force at all in the last 16 months. So that's been a very positive trend to see. I have in the past analyzed the movement year over year, just internally in the department. When you look at those trends, there is some randomness there.
Right.
So I was very heartened. I found it very heartening to see this year that we had such a huge drop. I think that's a meaningful change. And I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on this metric moving forward, and would be happy to share the reporting that I've done internally with you all as well.
That's fantastic. I greatly appreciate that. I think it's a really good trend here for the city of Boise. And if we can go back a couple slides under the performance of duty.
This is BPD's investigations. We have this, and we also have OPA's data as well. Happy to show anything that's helpful.
Okay. I did have a question on this. I don't know if this would be better for BPT or maybe you can even give me some examples, either it be OPA or BPT. What is an allegation of performance of duty of something that was sustained?
In the context
in a broader category,
yes.
Not specific examples.
In OPA's data, we did have essentially some failures to follow up on things. Or failures to turn on body cams. And in those situations, we felt that it was more of a coaching opportunity rather than anything intentional or a serious issue. There is more variation in BPD's data. I may have Director McKay address that further when she comes up, as she is a little more focused on the audits for these allegations.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I think kind of along those lines, and I should know the answer to this, but when BPD does an internal investigation and it's sustained, does OPA still go and do an audit of the sustained ones, or is it just the ones that maybe? I'm trying to figure out like why the two are so different from each other, and I think it's because if the police department has determined that there was a problem and an issue, they're usually solving it there instead of it having to then go to OPA and be sort of re-looked at. Am I getting that correct?
Madam President, Councilmember Halliburton. So our process with our 4 sustained this year, I believe they came into OPA first, and then were also shared with BPD. We do audit all of BPD's investigations, regardless of the final outcome. And sometimes we begin that a little before the final outcome is determined and just make sure that we are all in agreement with the outcome. And if not, there's a process there as well.
So on the previous slide, then those are the ones where they went through OPA as far as the engagement went versus going through BPD.
When allegations come into OPA, our case administrator does share them with BPD as well at that time.
Yep. Okay.
The overlap that we have between ours, have the figure here. In this current visualization, 13 of those also came from OPA and were passed along to BPD. So they're represented in both of our samples. And both of those 4 sustained for OPA are also present in these statistics here. So 2 of the performance of duty and 2 of the failure to record are also in OPA statistics.
Yep, great. And then when we were looking at some of our officer involved shootings at the end and kind of that longer term, chart over that 10-year period of time, I think the other part that is maybe interesting to me, because we don't know, is it a weird year? Is there that a lot of stuff happened? Maybe a lot of stuff didn't. Is it just the particular situation? But what I would be really interested in knowing is over time, if there's policies that we're putting in place and we could say, oh, a policy went in place at this time. And that looks like since a policy has been in place, we've seen a little bit of difference, whether that's training, a new policy, whatever it may be. I think that's where I'm kind of curious to see, okay, we know about where we're at for a 10-year period of time. Are there things that we're doing that are moving it in a particular direction one way or the other? And also, quite frankly, some of the other cities as well, like are they seeing those same policies, moving in one direction or the other? And the example I think that you gave earlier is using some more of our non-lethal force. Hopefully that has something to do with it as well. And some training that I know has been kind of being pushed a little bit harder, that we're actually seeing some impact. So it'd be nice to figure out if there's policies that are associated with any of those trends that we see. And it's always kind of hard to extrapolate that out of data because, again, there's so much that's up to chance too.
Councilmember Halliburton, those are great thoughts. And Director McKay will touch on some of those more qualitative aspects that are harder to put in the numbers. But just as a preview, we do see a lot of great scenario training happening at BPD that we're excited about. And as you mentioned, OBV has OPA has reviewed on-body video that shows how a pepper ball use may have potentially prevented a suspect from coming so close to an officer that it's hard for them to make a choice other than deadly force. So I think there are some great interventions that are happening.
Madam Mayor, thank you for the presentation. And I just want to mention it because I don't want to forget the opportunity, but the anytime that we do have deadly force and there are officer involved shootings, there's a lot of commentary, and I know our chief of police and officers might be a little superstitious about us talking about it, but we did around Halloween right before the election. We did talk about it then, and I think we're safe to still talk about it now. So I just want to commend you for your leadership on this. I also will use all of your qualifiers that police officers do not have a lot of options when someone does pull a weapon or especially a gun on them. So we're fortunate. There's a good deal of luck that is involved in here too. But I can't imagine 16 months without both top-down instruction and then bottom-up trust in that leadership to get to where we are today. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for the roles that you've played in this and keeping this city safe and strengthening relationships with law enforcement. So thank you.
I'll piggyback off that really quick too. I just want to, I think, Lexi, this data collection and the work that you're doing to try to build out the data sets is really excellent. Really excellent work. I'm really proud that we're able to be one of the cities that is partnering with our police department. And thank you so much to the police department for partnering with the office to share that data and have access and transparency. I think that's important for our residents. And it's important, to your point, for other municipalities to see and model and and what we're uncomfortable with, we should work to solve and fix. And there's nothing so far that I have seen that's made me feel that way. And I support Councilmember Nash's comments about the direction of the department, of the police department, and where we're going and the partnership that we've seen. It's really amazing work by everybody. So thank you so much for bringing us this information. And we had a preview of it a couple weeks ago, and it's really interesting to dive in and all of the the information that you have, the levers that you have to pull and dive into. So I encourage council to follow up if there's other things that we're interested in seeing, because probably Lexi hasn't. Thank you so much.
Madam President, Councilmember Nash, we really appreciate the kind words. And if you have any requests, I'm always happy to hear about them.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Nash.
Lexi, one thing I would be interested in is what this data looks like when you overlay gun ownership. It looks like mostly Western states on top, and it would not surprise me if there's higher rates of gun ownership in all those places, but I would be curious.
Councilmember Nash, I didn't look into that question specifically, but I did look into what weapon a suspect was armed with in each of these cities. I did not see a significant difference in anything other than vehicles. There were some cities that had a strong trend towards suspects using vehicles as a quote unquote weapon that we did not have. But other than that, guns were similarly represented in most cities. All right, thank you. I'll pass things off to Director McKay.
Thank you so much, Lizzie.
Okay, well, while we're on the topic of critical incidents, since our last report to you in October of 2025, OPA has released 3 critical incident reports, Wilski, Reyes, and Pope, all of which occurred in 2024. And you'll see that there was a significant delay in the Wilski report. OPA held that report at the request of the Ada County prosecutor while criminal charges were pending against Nicholas Umpenhauer and Skylar Mead up in Nez Perce County. Both individuals were sentenced last month, and shortly thereafter, OPA released its report. With the release of that Wilski report, OPA has no pending critical incident reports. That is a moment to celebrate. As Lexi mentioned, no critical incidents in 2025 and none to date in 2026. And that is notable because for the 2 preceding years, we had 6 in each year, 2023 and 2024. And naturally, that raises the question, what has changed? Based on Lexi's analysis, we know that there is a shift in the type of force being used. And you will also hear more about the highly effective training currently underway at BPD, which appears to be reinforcing sound decision-making and tactics under stress. And candidly, we recognize that outcomes in policing are also influenced by the nature of situations that officers encounter. While preparation and training matter greatly, the dynamics of each incident play a role. I mentioned last October that I would be collaborating with BPD to establish a clear process and timeline for the timely release of critical incident video and reports. A specific thank you to Captain Nia for partnering with me on this project. What this stemmed from was the length of time for the release of all the reports and the video. At best, it was 7 months, and at not the best was 2 years. While the lengthy timeframes were due to a variety of different factors, the bottom line is that we knew we could do better. What was created is captured in this visual. It shows each separate stage of the process and timeline for each stage. What this illustrates is that absent exigent circumstances, reports should be released around the 6-month mark post-incident. And while I'm thrilled that we have no incidents by which to utilize this process, it's here if we need it. On this slide, I have grouped the recommendations that emerged from our and BPD's review of the 6 critical incidents in 2024. While each incident involved its own unique circumstances, several consistent themes became apparent across the reviews. And although these recommendations stem from those specific cases, their value extends beyond them. Taken together, they highlight opportunities to inform training, policy, and operational practices moving forward. I will briefly address each of these. Oops. Across multiple reports, OPA and BPD emphasize the importance of strong supervisory leadership during critical incidents. This includes clearly establishing roles at the outset and then continually reassessing those roles as the incident evolves. This includes, when feasible, intentionally transitioning, I'm talking about supervisors, intentionally transitioning from hands-on operational involvement to command and control functions. Active oversight is absolutely essential. Supervisors must ensure tactical discipline, effective coordination of resources, and adherence to overall strategy, particularly during complex or multi-agency responses. Moving to the second block, several reports identified challenges related to ineffective communication, inadequate pre-planning, and a failure to adhere to assigned roles. Recommendations stress the need for clear, ongoing communication, and that's from officer to officer and officer to suspect, or subject, I should say. This includes planning for contingencies in advance and maintaining disciplined role adherence during high stress and rapidly evolving events. In practical terms for communication, this means, and this is so important, respecting the designated communicator and avoiding the tendency to talk over or add to communications in ways that dilute clarity or escalate tension. On the flip side, I just have to add, we've also seen scenarios where you have a designated communicator and it's chaotic, as you can imagine, when you have a high volume of officers responding to a quickly evolving incident, and officers start to talk over the designated communicator, and seeing that designated communicator or a supervisor immediately issue a command to stop, it's pretty remarkable, because when officers hold this role effectively, it works. I shouldn't say all the time, but it gives you every opportunity to resolve it without force. So OPA also sought to reinforce the importance of de-escalation, tactical patience, and sound critical thinking in high-risk encounters. This requires slowing incidents down when possible, exploring available options, and actively seeking resolutions that minimize the need for force. It also means continually reassessing what strategies are working, identifying those that are not, and adapting accordingly. Effective de-escalation is not static. It demands ongoing evaluation and flexibility. With regard to training and interagency preparedness, OPA and BPD have placed a sustained emphasis on scenario-based training to reinforce effective communication, supervision, role clarity, contact and cover principles, and de-escalation in high-risk incidents. Recommendations have included incorporating supervision standards into sergeant and lieutenant training, conducting regular scenario-based exercises, and expanding joint training with partner agencies to strengthen coordination during multi-agency responses. These efforts help ensure that expectations around leadership, communication, and tactical discipline are practiced and not just articulated. The last category is equipment readiness, availability, and thoughtful deployment of tools. For example, consistent use of body-worn video was lacking in 2 incidents, underscoring the need for equipment availability, reinforced compliance, and accountability. OPA also recommended continuing evaluations of tactics and tools, including less lethal options, canine deployment, drones, and armored vehicles, to assess their effectiveness, associated risks, and overall de-escalation value. Enhancing the integration of technology, particularly drones, has also been a key area of focus. And one final note on canine practices. Following the Cook critical incident, BPD committed to an independent evaluation of its canine deployment policies and training program. OPA supported that effort and looks forward to reviewing its findings. Lexi, this is going backwards. I need my IT support team. I guess I'll just use this. One of OPA's core functions is auditing. You'll see here that I've grouped this body of work into two categories. The first are complaints made directly to BPD and investigations initiated by the department. And the second is the show and use of force. We reviewed 98 combined department-initiated and community complaints against BPD officers. We made individual coaching and department-wide training recommendations in 10% of those. We contested 3 incidents, one of which is still pending. There were 275 entries total for use of force, show of force, and vehicle-related force. We audited every use of force, vehicle-related force, and 10% of the show of force entries. In 2% of those cases, we made coaching and/or training recommendations and contested 2 incidents. So what does that all mean? Honestly, it means BPD is doing an excellent job of reviewing its own work and initiating investigations when appropriate. From internal affairs to the first line supervisors up through the chain of command, overall, we are seeing reviews that are fair, objective, and thorough. More specifically, we are seeing professionalism and competence, measured approaches, and proactive policing strategies. In those cases that we made recommendations, we saw opportunities for improvement in communication, and that might be, for example, the failure to change tactics when the communication was ineffective, tactical patience, and holding roles. In a small number of incidents, we emphasized the importance of the officer capturing their reasoning in their reports, and of equal importance, the supervisor critically reviewing those reports. Because of recent policy changes at BPD, now a supervisor is also responsible for reviewing those reports and making sure that they meet the standards set forth in policy. So what about the ones we contested? Disagreements between a police department and an audit agency on use of force often stem from the inherently subjective nature of certain evaluation standards. While policies and legal framework provide structure, assessing whether force was reasonable, necessary, or proportional frequently requires the interpretation of rapidly evolving circumstances. Auditors and department reviewers may view the same set of fact through different lenses, one emphasizing strict policy adherence and accountability, and the other focusing on real-time decision-making and the officer's perspective. These differences have led to good faith disagreements rooted not in the facts themselves, but in how these subjective standards are applied. And importantly, these differences are not divisive, and that holds true for the differences that we have in findings and critical incidents as well. They create opportunities for productive dialogue that benefit both the agency and the oversight body. Through thoughtful discussion, both departments can clarify expectations, align interpretations, and ultimately improve performance, accountability, and outcomes. So when OPA looks at BPD holistically, and that means everything, every training we've gone to, audit we've done, critical incident review, down to our twice monthly meetings on anything and everything going on. Here's what we see. First, strong organizational performance, training excellence, and we also see some top areas for continuing development. And I'll talk about each of those with a little more detail. With regard to strong organizational performance, we see a high level of professionalism and competence in the performance of duties. OPA audits consistently reflect that personnel conduct themselves professionally and that supervisory and command reviews are thorough, timely, and well documented. Officers are often routinely observed employing measured and thoughtful approaches during calls for service. Even in stressful and rapidly evolving situations, communications generally remain controlled and professional. We have also observed officers applying de-escalation techniques organically, often before a supervisor arrives on scene. That speaks to a positive culture of problem solving and risk mitigation at the first line level. In addition, the department demonstrates a strong commitment to proactive policing. Officers are viewed engaging in strategies designed to prevent incidents and address community concerns rather than waiting and reacting solely in a reactive posture. Second, we see training excellence. And if you have not had the opportunity to go to some of these live scenario trainings, I really encourage you to. They are impressive. The instructors demonstrate deep expertise, a high degree of skill, and effective teaching techniques. The content is current and relevant. The delivery is structured and effective. And importantly, there is meaningful repetition built into the training cycle. We see and appreciate that OPA's recommendations are being incorporated into the curriculum and life scenarios. Specifically, training in 2025 focused on crisis communication along with de-escalation. What this looks like in practice is slowing things down, engaging in de-escalation communication, and engaging from a safe distance with cover and concealment. OPA, like I said, has attended these, and it really emphasizes to us how difficult it is to make these decisions in real time with rapidly evolving scenarios. So that's a really good exercise for us to have as we then take that and review, through critical incidents or audits or, whatnot. It's very obvious to me that the repetition is strengthening skill development and promoting consistency across the department. Finally, a couple of things that we see for continued development, communication and use of less lethal tools. First, we recognize that consistent use of effective communication and strategies during high stress encounters is challenging. It is, without a doubt. And given how effective communication is, we're going to continue to emphasize ongoing development of that muscle memory in training. One aspect of communication we encourage in training is the opportunity for officers, when they have time, is to more fully leverage available information to engage individuals through dialogue and tactical communication rather than just relying on repeated or elevated verbal commands. Our second area of focus is on less lethal tools. With advances in equipment technology, OPA strongly supports the continued development of policy and training for the judicious use of new and advanced tools. And finally, looking forward to the rest of 2026 and OPA's priorities and goals. Lexi is working to quantify the impact of BPD's behavioral health teams by analyzing calls for service and effect on outcomes. I will be working on developing a strategic plan for our office with the help of the very capable and generous operational effectiveness team. And finally, we will be taking a deeper dive into the opportunities and pitfalls of emerging technologies in policing. With that, Madam President and members of council, completes my presentation, my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Councilmember Nash.
Nicole, how much personal credit do you take for how great things are in this city right now?
Zero. Absolutely zero. You could look to these good folks at the back of the room and they're doing the hard work. I am really pleased, though, to give them such a glowing review because what we are seeing is impressive.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Nicole, I'll have some compliments here in a second, but can you talk a little bit about the strategic plan, kind of what your thoughts and vision is there and why?
Yes, Madam President and Council Member Halliburton, thank you for that question. It's evolving in my mind all of the time. OPA has never had a strategic plan. I personally have never written one, so very grateful for OE's offer of assistance on this. But from the time I started in this position 2.5 years ago and what I could see and where I thought we could go and where we are now, we have made so much progress. And so I think now looking at what we could do is going to be greatly informed by both what Kathy does as our case administrator and what Lexi's able to do with data. We have the opportunity to be partnering with BPD on the transition from two different software companies on the data. And so I think having Lexi involved in that project is going to be essential in terms of what kind of data we can have access to right off the bat, how it can be organized, and really be able to shape what OPA can do. And so I need to figure out how to put that all together in a plan that's high level enough that, you know, we can still get there, but be a little more focused than I thought we would be.
Well, I'm excited to see how it turns out. Unfortunately, I have high expectations because I think that your team has proven that you can live up to those expectations. I just want to say a couple things. I found myself in the middle of your presentation getting like oddly emotional for an OPA presentation, but I know how far we've come since 2020 and what it was like here then and what it's like here today. The trust I think that council has for our police department, the trust that our community members have for our police department. And I would give our police department a lot of credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would give your department a lot of credit for that as well.
Thank you.
I think, you know, good organizations have really good teams, and we've got a really strong team of 3 right here within your department, and, you know, a strong team back here represented by our police department too. But the two of you actually working together, those two different departments, I think is the key here. It's the data that has been able to shape, you know, some of our view of what's going on. It's the feedback. And as someone who's had to review every single critical incident for the last 6 years, the way that we do it now is different than what we did in the past. And there's not only giving feedback, there is taking the feedback and looking for that feedback. And I've noticed a large difference, I think, especially in the last couple of years, where we may see a critical incident and we may look at it and say, okay, well, that's probably justified, but that's never the end of the conversation. Both, I think, internally from the police department and OPA, everybody in the room is looking for what is one thing that we might be able to do just a little bit better. And it may be a big thing or it may be something really small. And I think that input and that feedback is always taken really seriously and implemented in a really meaningful way. And I think that is the reason why we've seen some of the success that we've seen in the last couple of years. So I just want to say thank you. You all are making my job a lot easier up here to understand what is happening within our city, what our police department is doing well, where there's opportunities to grow. And I think, you know, most importantly, building that trust 360 degrees all the way around. And I think when we have good information, really, really talented folks operating as a team, that trust becomes really easy. So thank you all for your work.
Madam President and Council Member Halliburton, thank you for those kind comments. And I have to give kudos to Chief Dennison, because when we get to these difficult discussions on voluminous records on serious incidents, like critical incidents, when I present different viewpoints and I come up with different findings, he is always open to listening to what the viewpoint is. And when I say mine, it's our investigator and me together. So somebody with great expertise. And sometimes he will incorporate our findings, and sometimes he just says, you know, I've looked at everything and I think we just see this differently. So really fortunate that we have this relationship where what OPA puts forward is truly considered. And we're fortunate to have that. So kudos to the BPD and Chief Dennison.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I will just add, I'm really looking forward to seeing the analysis findings from the behavioral health team deep dive. I think that will be really interesting in how we consider future decisions for funding and things like that. I think that's information that we're all eager to learn more. I know I'm eager to learn more about. Also, as you just mentioned, I've just heard from you over and over again what a pleasure it is to work with Chief Dennison and the department. So certainly want to acknowledge that. This has been great collaboration that we've seen coming together. So excited for the work you're doing. I also wanted to note, I think what I had learned recently was kind of when we're not in this crisis moment, how your work has changed a bit in being able to kind of have educational deep dives with community members and partners of ours, and really work look at the work differently, which I think will hopefully be highlighted a bit in that strategic plan, and what it looks like when we're not having to be reactionary and deal with those incidents as they come, what more can be done when we're not in those moments. So thank you so much. Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, with that, thank you, Nicole. With that, we'll recess until 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Madam President, Council.